Hi, I'm Dan from RideWrap. Today I'm going to run you through the installation of our Forbidden kits. We've got a Dreadnought here, but the Druid is very similar, so all the piece alignment is going to line up pretty well for that one as well. The first step we need to do is take a look at our instructions. So every box has a set of instructions on the inside and it has a diagram. We're going to follow along with this diagram and we're going to use that to help our installation and piece alignment. So step one is always to clean. We do have a brand new frame, but there is some oils and stuff from the factory, so we're going to want to clean those up with our pre-installed cleaning wipes. If you've ridden your bike already, you really want to give it a full wash. Think about it, it should look brand new. So while you're cleaning, you're going to want to pay attention to some very specific areas that can cause problems. Anywhere where there's a bearing, there's generally grease. You can see it in there. And that stuff is going to make it so our adhesive film is not going to stick. So I usually do a main clean with the first wipe, and then with the second one, I go up to all the little detail areas and I get around, you know, the BB, the headset, these pivot bearings, and everything like that, so that when I go there, I don't have any grease that I'm going to come into contact with. Referencing my install diagram and the piece labels on the kit, I'm going to see that piece number one is the drive side chainstay. So I've got my piece number one here, and I've already had my install solution mixed up. Check the instructions on what that is, but it's soap and water. I'm going to spray the piece down real nice, and I'm going to come over to the frame. I'm also going to spray the frame down right here so that everything's nice and wet. When I look at this piece, I'm going to look at the kind of thicker side, and that's going to be the front of the piece, and the thinner side is going to be the rear. And I'm just going to line it up on the main face here. And what we're looking for is defining features. So here on the back edge we have a nice curve that we're going to line up with the dropout curve. So I'll start with that one. And in the front, I'm going to notice that the relief here kind of meets that front edge and the back edge there, and when I kind of flop it over, it kind of lines up on the inside here. So that's pretty important. One of the convenient things about using the install solution is you can line it all up. Feel free to kind of peel it back up a little bit and figure out exactly where it's going to go before you start even squeegeeing. And then you know it's already lined up. So once I start squeegeeing, I've already figured out it's in the right place. In this case, it's dried up a little bit, so I'll spray it again. Make sure everything's nice and wet. And then I'll start squeegeeing. Now conveniently, some of the rear end pieces have already been started on here, so we're not going to go over squeegeeing technique quite yet. But when you do, make sure you give lots of pressure. Again, you've already positioned it, so you don't need to worry about moving it. And start from the center and work your way out. So I always work from face to face. So I've got my front face down. I can check it with my finger. I don't feel any water or air bubbles. I don't see anything. So I know I'm happy with that. And then when I move over to the top face, I hold it and I check that first edge before I move too far. Alright. So as I said, this piece is actually already installed, so I'm going to move on to the next piece and we'll talk about alignment as we go, and we'll finish up talking about squeegeeing on the front end for you. Piece number two is essentially the mirror piece of that. It's the non-drive chainstay. So I'm going to go grab the piece and we'll look at the alignment, which is essentially exactly the same. So as I peel the piece from the sheet, I'm always spraying it, keeping it nice and wet. As you saw, I sprayed the bike first. So looking at this piece, again, we have a wide end and a narrow end. We're going to start with the narrow end, and I'm going to try to line up some features. I see a nice curve here, so I'm going to use that against the dropout. So I've got about 3 mils to that curve there, and I'm just laying it up nicely, nice and gently. In the front, I also have a curve that aligns with just around this bearing, so I'm going to make sure that everything's lined up nice. I like that. The distance is kind of in the center between the two curves, so everything's looking good. And as before I start squeegeeing, I'm just going to kind of flap everything over, and I see, oh yeah, everything's going to line up how I want it to line up. So that's piece number 2. After this, you go squeegee that, get out all the bubbles, and we move on to piece number 3. I made a mistake, and I did piece number 3 first. Piece number 2 is actually the drive side seat stay. That's okay, they don't interfere, and piece number 3 is next anyhow, so we'll just come back to piece number 2. So this is a piece, you can see kind of a notch out here. That notch out is going to match up with this cable port. So we're going to use that for our alignment on this piece. Again, make sure to spray everything. So in this particular case, we have no guard here on the top. Generally, if your guard is pre-installed, that's a pretty convenient thing to utilize, but never fear, we can also do it without it. So I'm going to start in the back here. I've got a very nice cable port to go against, so I'm going to start there, and I'm going to kind of align it so that there's an even gap around it, and then at the end I've got a nice curve to match up with, so I'm going to use those 2 features. Boom. And then from towards the front, in this case I know that the guard kind of comes up to this front edge, so I'm just going to leverage that, and I'm going to kind of match what I know about that guard. So do that front edge here, and then when I start squeegeeing, I'm going to squeegee underneath like that. So again, I can pre-check it, make sure everything's aligned. The nice thing is, if you don't have the guard on, you can always stick the guard on top of it, so you're not going to have it in the wrong point. As long as you're happy with where all the positioning is, you're good. Squeegee it out, and off we go to piece number 3. So piece number 4 is the non-drive seat stay. So obviously piece number 3, as we mentioned, I did in the wrong order, as the chainstay and then the seat stay. As you notice, piece number 1 and 2 was the chainstay and the seat stay, so we do work side by side. So this one's got a lot of reference points for us, but the piece is pretty funky looking. So I always use this end. I see a kind of double horn here that obviously matches up with our brake mounts. So I like to start there. So I'll kind of utilize this curve as well at the dropout, similar to as we've been doing, and I will give it a nice little gap. I'll kind of line it up. I'll say, oh yeah, right on the brake mount, that looks good, and I'll kind of work my way up, just checking that next brake mount. Then I'll go to the front. In the front we have a curve here, as well as we have a cable port up here. So we don't want to go too far down, or else we'll intersect with the cable port. We don't want to go too far up because things just don't line up. So checking, you know, for a nice 3 mil gap around the cable port, nice gap there at the curve, and the piece in the middle, and I can just kind of tack that down like that, and everything will hold. And then I can start to squeegee. So I can also flap it over, right? So flap over this bottom piece. Check how it aligns on the lower bridge here. Looks pretty good to me, so we'll leave it at that. Another good one to check is on the inside here. We have another cable port, and actually I'm noticing that mine's kind of too far down. So what I'll do is I'll just peel it back gently, and I'm just going to slide this middle section here, not doing anything with the ends because I like how those are aligned. Much happier with that. Nice even gap around that inner cable port. Again, I usually just use my fingers, to be honest, to get kind of things set in place the first time. And off we go to squeegee land. All right. Piece number 5 is back on the drive side. It's got this kind of dog leg look to it. pretty silly. It's going to match up with the seat stay piece as well as the chainstay piece. So we're going to just kind of align it against those. So we have a top edge here on the seat stay that I'm going to start with, and I'm going to just give it a little gap between the two pieces, and I say okay. And then I also notice that there's a nice curve here to line it up with, so I'm going to look at that. And as you see, I drop it in the line. The bottom edge here kind of just lines right up with that chainstay piece as well, and it kind of falls into place. So you see that front edge is lined up. As I flop over, this kind of lines up with the inner piece of that chainstay, and on the bottom edge it kind of comes down into this bearing zone. It lines up pretty nice. So piece number 6 is this inner bridge here. I tend to not spray on the actual bike side when I deal with bridges because I want a little bit extra tack. So you go like that. So you'll see there's a couple features to line up off of. You have 2 curves here. Those kind of match these guard mounts. We have an inner edge here where we're aligning against the seat stay piece. And then obviously once those are kind of in place, things just kind of fall into place down here on the drive side as well. So a little flap in there. So I usually actually don't use a squeegee for these. I will use my trusty microfiber here. I'll just put my finger in and kind of hold it like that. And I will kind of rub it from the center towards the outside. And you see how things drop in there. So we're just trying to collect all that moisture out the edge, make sure there's no air bubbles, kind of push it over the top edge there. As it kind of peels back up like that, you can just give it a little rub there and it'll stay down. Again, I work similar to the squeegee with my finger. I start in the middle and I kind of push towards the edges. And that way I'm drawing any water that might be there out. This is one of those pieces also that you just give it a second, it's going to dry up and that's going to increase the tack. If you have a hair dryer, you can also give it a little bit of heat. Not too much, but so the heat does 2 things. It softens the film so that it can kind of curve into some of these complex shapes easier. It also dries up the adhesive. All that moisture that we sprayed on there gets dried up pretty quickly, and it allows us to tack down much better. Just watch that you don't do too much heat. That's the #1 thing with it. So as I was using heat on that piece number 6, I noticed that the inside of piece number 1 actually was kind of peeling back up. It's no big deal. That happens pretty often. Letting it dry and then giving it a bit of heat is going to allow you to just push that down with your finger, the microfiber, real gently. Again, not too much heat. Just want to warm it up. Piece number 7 on the Dreadnought is between this part. You're going to line it up top and bottom. See there's 2 pretty distinctive curves. see where those kind of line up nicely. Notice there's some kind of flaps that go over each edge. That matches up obviously with the shape of the bike. Want a little bit of protection there from the dirt. And off we go. So number 10, first piece on the front triangle, it's the top two. We're going to get this one really, really wet. We're going to lay it up and just check it out. So 2 points to check out on this one. There's the back and the front. So I always start at the front here and I give a nice little gap to the headset. And there is a little notch in the middle of the curve there, so it's kind of easy to find the middle. This one has a line in the middle. I also just double check that these corners are aligned nicely and evenly. So once that's kind of set, I'll just put my finger there and pick it up. And I will use that and I'll align it in the back so everything's looking symmetrical. Before I start squeegeeing or anything, I will also just flap down on under. And what I'll look for underneath is that the marks around the bottle cage holders are good and that they're even so that the points are meeting each other, and that means it's not twisted left and right. But you shouldn't have a problem with that if you use the top, the front, and the rear to align yourself in the center. So now that that is in place, I will begin squeegeeing. So we didn't talk too much about squeegeeing before, but it's easier to see on a large piece. I will spray the outside of the film, and I will start from the center, so that's the center of the piece, and I'll work my way outwards. And outwards means both outwards that way and outwards this way. In all directions, I'll always kind of start from this center point. So I always start on the top face, and I will just work my way up towards the front. Now you notice that every pass I do, I start back at the center, and I work my way. The other thing to notice is the deformation in my squeegee. And I'll get the blue one that you guys will have. You can see the deformation, it bends. And what we want it to bend, because that means we're putting the pressure. I don't want it to go in half like that, just a light bend kind of like that, so that when I do it. I'm going to start from the middle, and I'm going to work on my way towards the back. Notice that I'm doing lots of strokes and they're overlapping. So I'm not just doing it once and then moving on. I'm overlapping and I'm making sure that all of the bubbles have been removed from that top plane. I'm not going to worry about this little tongue right now. It's a pretty small piece and there's a lot of compound curves there. So I'm just going to let it dry up and then I'll be able to seat it down really easy. So now that that top is perfectly squeegeed, I can tell because I'm running my finger over it, I don't see any bubbles, it's dialed in. I'm actually going to lift the edge just up to that edge there, or lift the side just up to the edge and give another spray before I start on the next side. So as I come onto the side, I'm going to focus on that edge first, and again working from the center towards the sides. I'm going to make sure that that edge is squeegeed down, and then I'm going to move into the actual side of the frame. So now I'm going to do the same thing, but moving into the bottom. Focusing on that edge before I go too far. So that's down. You see these are it's flapping up on that corner there. I'm not going to do anything with it right now. It's just really wet. So I'm going to move to the other side. Rinse, repeat. I do like to spray the top of the film, lets my squeegee glide a little bit better. And you can also tell where you have and haven't squeegeed. One thing that's pretty useful with the bike stand, you can actually move your bike around. Usually helps you from crunching over and trying to get in some funny angle where you can't see. Alright. You can use my microfiber on the edges to get those to sit down. I'm just going to run, again, always from the center outwards. I'm going to soak up that water at the edge, and then the piece will stick down. Come up here still. So even with the microfiber, I'm having a bit of trouble just getting that one to tack down in on that complex curve. So I'm not going to fight it. I'm just going to grab a little bit of heat and let that do the work. So just heat it up. I actually won't even use a towel or anything. Just use my finger. So piece number 11 is actually the Downtube, and I could have done this before as well. I actually like to just set up and position the head tube since it intersects with both the top tube and the down tube. One of the things is you want to make sure there's not too small of a gap at the headset. That's going to potentially cause some interception. But again, what you can do is just have that head tube piece aligned at the beginning so that you're working kind of off of that. So it's pretty easy. You look for the center point in the front, you have 2 notches, and then you're going to line it, and you can kind of see where it also meets the top tube here, as well as it meets the top tube here, and this cable port. So you're going to want to have a nice even gap all the way around, as well matching left to right. So piece number 11 is the down tube. So notice that I've moved my bike. I've put it pretty vertical so that when I'm looking at it I can see. This one, again, we have a tongue at the front, top front, so we're going to align that to the headset. And then we have a guard cut out here. Now the guard is not on this bike currently. It is a stick-on guard, if I'm not mistaken. So if it's there, you can work with that. And if it's not, then you can put this on. And we do actually include a piece that can go below the guard and then you stick the guard on top, so that's always nice as well. So I've aligned my piece. A couple points to look at is I can notice and see how I'm aligned against this corner of my head tube that I've just added in there. So that's important, and I can see that on both sides. So I might want to close that gap a little bit. Oops. And then I can also kind of flap them over and check that my alignment at the bottom mounts is good. Now I'm noticing here that I don't have very good alignment on them. They're not meeting up evenly, so I'm going to readjust. I'm much happier with that now. So once that's all aligned, I'm going to start by squeegeeing the bottom face again. Similar to the top tube, I'm going to work on the bottom first and then move over to the sides. This tongue, usually don't go too hard on it. Sometimes it'll stick first go, but sometimes there's just too much moisture under there. No worries. And focus on the bottom. So I can even feel it. I can see there's no bubbles in there. I'm happy with the bottom. Don't need to worry about that anymore. I'll just kind of peel this side back a little bit. Spray it up. And again, I will focus on overlapping my strokes and going for that edge before I move on to the face. So I did take the time to just line up this little tongue at the end. I guess it's a side flap, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. And I line it to this shock mount hole as well, so that that's looking pretty good. Keep it. So after I've done this side part, I'm going to focus on the next edge before I go over to the top. And it's finished up. Before I move on, I'm always going to check it, make sure that I've not made a mistake. I can always, while it's still wet, I can always easily peel it back. Whereas it gets harder as it dries up. Move on to the next side. Alright, I'm not going to focus on the bottom quite yet. I'm not worried about it. It's just going to dry up. I'm going to go back to the head tube. I'm going to check my alignment. So the things I always look at are, where is my bottom corner here? I want a nice even gap between the pieces. So that's looking pretty good on that side. Check the other side. It's looking pretty even as well. So I know I'm happy with it. And then I'll go back and start from the front. And squeegee there and around. I'll also peel it back, you know, and put a little bit of tension there so that it's easier as I go around. I'm not going to sweat the edges because we can solve that with microfiber and a little bit of heat. As long as the main section is good. Alright, so I will grab my microfiber now and just top edge. So piece number 13 is the seat tube piece, so it's a big blocky one. This one can be a bit tricky to line up because it goes all the way around both sides, and you got to kind of line it up that way as well as up and down. So this one has two good notches in it for the little reliefs in the frame there, as well as a notch in the middle. So I start with the middle, top and bottom, try to get it what looks to be nice and centered, and then I'll flap it around, and if I see a nice concentric circle with about a 3mm gap, I know I'm pretty happy. I can also see that they'll flap into the little notch of the top tube there, and everything kind of lines up nicely against the other pieces, so I'm quite pleased with that. So I'll just pull it off a little bit, and then I'll start from the middle. Same technique as usual. We're going to start in the middle in the back. I'm not going to worry about the edges at this point. I'm just going to tack in that back center section. Once I have that tacked in, I know I can give a little bit more spray. And then I can work my way towards the front, again working from that back edge that we already tacked in, we know is bubble free, towards the front. This one has a nice flat side to the seat tube, so it's nice, it's pretty easy to focus on that area, make sure everything's good, and then I'll just dial in the last little flap here. Before moving and doing the opposite on the other side. Alright, I'm going to let that one dry, and we're just going to move on to the next piece while it is doing that. So piece number 14 is this little one, and it goes right inside here above the shock. I'm actually going to do just a very light spray just on the piece and not on the bike. As I said before, on littler pieces it's easier to have a bit more tack, and that's how you can do that. So it's pretty easy to line up. You've got this bridge here, and it's matching the bridge. Just watch that you're not overlapping the seat tube piece. Pretty happy with the position there. I'll just do a little squeegee on the piece, and then I'll actually finish it up with my microfiber because I got a little bit more dexterity with that. Piece number 15. Piece number 15 and 16 are pretty much the same but opposing. I think I'm going to get it wrong. gotten it wrong. Piece number 16, I'm just gonna do that first. It's on the non-drive side. So there's lots of features to line up here. It's a pretty easy piece because it's kind of like a big flat one. But I always start, because there's the down tube piece there, I want to have a nice even gap and everything's aligned, so I'll tack that corner in first. And then I'll line everything up, and you see it kind of just falls into place around the BB area and this pivot bearing as well. Can you see that? Mm-hmm. So again, being that it's one of these slightly smaller pieces but big and flat, I'm just going to focus on the big flat area first and make sure that's perfect before I get into some of the nitty gritty. This is a perfect candidate for the old microfiber cloth. So the microfiber, what it's doing is actually absorbing that water. And as that water absorbs, the tack time decreases. So it gets tackier and tackier, and that's what I want it to, because it was kind of peeling back up. So I always start with the microfiber, then I move to some heat if I really need it. Now we'll actually do piece 15, which is the same but opposite. Again, I'll start up here at the down tube piece. I'll give it a little gap, nice 3 mils. Align everything there, and then the rest of the piece just kind of falls into place. Easy as that. See, there's a nice line to go against the pivot bearing. There is a chain ring line, so if your bike is built, it won't interfere and you'll still be able to install it. Alright, I'm just going to let those dry up a second and then I'll come back to them. In the meantime, I'll do piece number 17, which is an optional piece, but I'll put it on because there's no guard. And that goes where the guard will go on the down tube. And it just sits in that little box we've already created for it. So it's a pretty easy one to line up. This will go underneath your stick-on guard. This one will have a little bit of a microfiber. Well, maybe it needs some heat. Oh no, I got it. So the last piece is piece number 18, and that's underneath the bottom bracket. I really do a light spritz on these ones because it's quite curved. There's a pretty handy little drain hole there to line up off of. So you got the notch out for the chain guide, and then you have the drain hole, and then there's a front guard cover bolt. So that one's pretty easy to get dialed in. I don't even use my squeegee on this one. I just Alright, so that's all the pieces on the Forbidden Dreadnought, and the last step will be to just do a whole once over with the heat gun or the hair dryer, just to check all my edges, and then I'll let it dry overnight, 24 hours before I ride it. So it'll be ready to go and all protected. This one's going to get built up, but yeah, have fun. So I've gone over the whole bike with the hair dryer. I've checked all the edges. I've made sure everything's sitting down nicely. I'm still going to let it dry overnight, and I'm going to check it again right before I ride it. But everything's looking like it's sat down pretty sweet. I didn't find any bubbles. If I had found a bubble, I would have peeled back that section. You don't have to peel back the whole piece, but you can just kind of peel back the section, get the bubble, push it out. Make sure you spray it again, and then squeegee it back on. So I've checked everything over. I'm super happy with how this came out. All the alignment looks great. And the final step, of course, is the old RideWrap sticker. The standard placement for us is one on the back of the seat tube. And since this is one of our riders' bikes, it will go on the outer chainstay here, or seat stay.